There was an ancient Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, and he said, "Govern a great nation as you would cook a small fish. Do not overdo it."
Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to interrupt one of the most exciting and electric moments in the history of our school, but I want to proceed with the introduction of our distinguished guest. Some of you will remember about 20 years ago, and of course many of you students will not remember, that Pepperdine College, then located in South Central Los Angeles, was planning to become a university and change its address to Malibu, California. At that time, no one could have predicted the great success that this change of address and the many other factors would mean for Pepperdine University. On that occasion, the governor of California was with us as we launched this campus, then called the Miracle of Malibu. And of course, several years later, the governor would also change his address from Sacramento to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. My guess is that 20 years ago, we could not have predicted the dramatic effect that change of address would have on our nation and on our world. But we're deeply honored today that upon his return to California, President Reagan has chosen to visit us once again and to provide an unparalleled educational opportunity for our students. And so it is indeed a pleasure as well as a privilege to introduce an honorary alumnus of Pepperdine University and the 40th President of the United States, President Ronald Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Davenport, and thank you, Dr. Larry Keene, for your invocation. It had a special meaning for me because Dr. Keene was the pastor, is the pastor of the church where Nancy and I were married 37 years ago. And a special hello to Margaret Brock, a very dear and cherished friend. I'm pleased to be here because, as you've been told, I have an association with the university. As governor, yes, I spoke at your birth of a college dinner in 1970, and later I participated at the dedication of Seaver College, and Nancy and I treasure the honorary degrees that were presented to both of us. I have a little problem about honorary degrees. After my graduation from Eureka College, Illinois, 25 years later, the college asked me back and presented me with an honorary degree. And that just compounded a sense of guilt that I had nursed for 25 years because I thought the first one probably was honorary. Well, my degree was in economics, and you know, in the job I've held, you know, you're certainly limited anymore on ethnic jokes or things of that kind, but I guess I can, now that I have a degree in that, I can quote Harry Truman, who asked someone to find him a one-armed economist, one who would make a projection without saying, on the other hand. But let me just seriously tell you about the job that I have just left. You don't really become president. You have temporary custody over an institution called the Presidency. As Bismarck, that great German leader, once said, the best a statesman can do is listen to the rustle of God's mantle through history and try to catch it by the hem for a few steps. No one could leave the position that I held without a feeling of those things that you didn't get done, that you wanted to accomplish, and then time ran out and they weren't done. So I'm going to devote myself to try to persuade my fellow citizens, for example, of our need to pass an amendment to the Constitution calling for a balanced budget. And our state has such a thing. The federal government doesn't. For half a century or more, for the last 58 years, there have only been 8 scattered years in which the United States had a balanced budget. 8 out of the 58. Thomas Jefferson in 1798 said, "I wish it were possible to obtain a simple amendment to our Constitution. I would be willing to depend on that alone for the reduction of the administration of our government to the genuine principles of its Constitution." And he added, I mean an additional article taking from the federal government the power of borrowing. Well, I'm going to go out on the mashed potato circuit all that I can and start trying to arouse the citizenry to insist on that. And also, in addition, and to help bring it about, to ask them to get legislation giving the president the power of line item veto. I'm sure that you understand what that means and what it has. The president does not have it. 43 governors have it. I had it when I was governor of California, and I used it in those 8 years 943 times and was never once overridden by the legislature. Now that reveals something. It takes a 2/3 majority of the legislature in California to pass the budget, and it takes 2/3 of a majority to override a veto. But the budget would come down, and buried in it with all those facts and figures would be these exceptional spending items that were someone's special province or political debt they were paying and so forth. And I could not only veto them out, I could veto them down. I could leave one in if I thought it was worth it and say, but not that much money. And yet the same 2/3 who would vote to put them in there, once they had to vote on the veto, which meant voting on them singly out there where the public could see them, they couldn't get the same 2/3 vote. Now, I think that's high time that a president has that. The next thing, you're going to be facing in a year or two the reapportionment again, the redrawing of the legislative and the congressional districts of California. This is done by the legislature. It is a great conflict of interest. And one party has been in charge of that for more than a half a century, of the reapportionment. And that's why here in California, recently, more people of one party voted for their congressional candidates, but the other party elected 60% of the congressional delegates, because the gerrymandering is aimed at putting as many as you can of one party in as few districts as possible. You guarantee the holder of that seat a sure vote, of course, but the majority of the districts are arranged for the other side. And it's about time that we got rid of a system of this conflict of interest that prevails and adopted a system whereby a blue ribbon citizens committee, bipartisan, equal sides, takes over every 10 years after the census, the laying out of the districts in such a manner as to make them of interest to the people in those districts, not to the politicians holding the jobs. And I'll take one more moment here also. There's another one. This one I couldn't try to get while I was president because it would look selfish on my part. But now that I'm not there, I'm going to propose to the people that we wipe out the 22nd Amendment that limits a president to 2 terms. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with the individual who's holding the office. The presidency and the vice presidency, these are the only jobs in which the entire citizenry votes. And I believe it is an infringement of your democratic rights to limit how many times you can vote for who you want to vote for. Well, why have I told you these things? Really, because freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Every generation has to devote itself to preserving and protecting freedom. During my lifetime, there have been incidents and times when the federal government began assuming powers and autonomy that belonged to the states and to the local communities and to the people. And it's taken a fight to wipe some of these things out and to get us back to where we have that difference that is so much ours alone, that our Constitution, of all the constitutions of the world, with only one recent exception, ours is the only one that says we, the people, tell in this document what the government can do. All the others, the government has a constitution that the government tells the people what they can do. Well, ours is different, and we have to preserve that. We have halted in recent years what had been a dire threat against government, and we have turned it back. The great strength of the United States is unique in all the world. We are the only nation that is made up of a federation of sovereign states, and we must never let those in Washington who think that they should make the states just administrative districts of the federal government have their way. No way. So now that we've halted the growth of government, I think we should keep it that way. One of the things I'm very proud of is that I turned a commission loose on seeing how many federal regulations could be eliminated. We eliminated fully half of them. And we estimate that the savings to all of you in work, paperwork imposed on the people of the United States and on local and state governments and so forth, has been reduced by 600 million man-hours a year. So, well, let me wind up by just saying there was an ancient Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, and he said, "Govern a great nation as you would cook a small fish. Do not overdo it." Well, that's enough of the monologue. I understand that we're going to have a dialogue here between us, and I look forward to that.
much more personal note. Mr. President, my name is Dieter Tack. I'm an economics major from Whittier, California. I was wondering, if a student such as myself were to ask you to lunch, would you accept, and where would you want to go?
You're breaking my heart. I didn't know any such question was going to be asked or invitation extended, and unfortunately, I have to leave here pretty much on schedule because I have a meeting that's been prearranged down in Los Angeles.
Where would you want to go if you were to ask to lunch?
Well, again, you have me a little trapped. I have to tell you, this is the first time in these 8 years that I have driven up the Coast Highway from downtown, and the left side I was always a little accustomed to the houses of beach houses along there, but the other side of the road, that was all just brush. 8 years ago, I can't, and all those wonderful restaurants and everything else. I think I'd be safer if I said, wherever the students here thought was the best place to go to lunch, that's where I'd go to lunch.
Hello, Mr. President. My name is Nancy Holloway, and I'm an art major from San Francisco, California. My question for you today is, are you more or less relieved that your term is completed, or do you miss your responsibilities?
No, I missed something there at the first.
Oh, okay. I'll talk closer. Are you more or less relieved that your term in the Oval Office is over, or do you miss your responsibilities?
Oh, it was a bittersweet parting. You can't say goodbye to the people that have surrounded you and been working with you for these 8 years on things we deem so important without a tear welling up on both sides. And there is a little nostalgia about the routine and all. Living in the White House was very pleasant. I'm an enemy of bureaucracy generally, but I must tell you that the permanent staff of the White House are so proud and have such an esprit de corps that life was just wonderful there. But at the same time, a Californian away for 8 years lives in a little state of homesickness permanently. There are some funny things that come, you know, like walking past the TV set and the news is on and I hear the voice saying, "Today the President," and I say, "What'd I do?" And then I remember he's not talking about me.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Christy McMahon, and I'm a telecommunications and history major, and I'm from Sonoma, California. And my question for you today is, if you could serve another term, what problem would you solve, and how would you solve it?
The things that I've just talked about, the things that remained undone, the balanced budget amendment, the line item veto, and the reapportionment thing. I was all set. In fact, had started moving on those things in Washington. But there's another thing. When the Congress knows that you can't be there beyond a second term, they get a little braver than they were earlier on. And they start roadblocking you. I had at least 30 judge appointments that they never acted on to ratify them at all. They just got to wait. They were waiting, hoping to see if their fellow didn't get in and he could appoint the judges instead of me. But so those are the things that, yes, that I think needed to be done. And I think, and this is why I'm going to go out in the mashed potato circuit, I think all of you've got to realize that when you begin speaking up and making yourself heard, those fellows up on Capitol Hill listen. They don't want to come home and have somebody glaring at them and saying, "Why didn't you?" So you have to speak up for the things that you want as a as a body, as the people.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Suzanne Goodlow, and I am an organizational communications major from Amityville, New York. Before I ask my question, I would like to make a comment to both you, Mr. President, and Dr. Davenport, that I am extremely grateful to live in a country where a 38-year-old black woman can decide to come to college and then have the opportunity to be associated with an institution like Pepperdine. Thank you. My question to you, Mr. President, is your administration has been accused of putting the civil rights movement in the back of the bus again, so to speak. I would like to know if you feel if that is an accurate characterization of your administration.
No, it isn't, and it's one of the most bitter things that I dealt with all the time I was there, and that the media would so much try to point out that I was on that side, because I was raised in a family, I have one brother, mother and a father, in which from that high, my brother and I were taught that the worst sin in the world is prejudice and discrimination. And I won't take your time to tell you of some experiences in college, but then I became a sports announcer when I graduated. And I was one of that little colony of sportscasters and writers across the country that were editorializing constantly to open up Major League Baseball to our black community. And finally, success came, and that was done. As governor of California, I appointed more minority members to policy-making and executive positions than all the previous governors of California put together. And to be accused repeatedly of somehow being prejudiced the other way, no, that is totally out of step with the way I feel. I got a letter, and I want to tell all of you this, because it applies to more than just this particular issue. I got a letter from a man. He impressed me with that letter so much not too long ago. He said, you can go to live in France, but you can't become a Frenchman. You can go to live in Japan, but you can't become Japanese. And he cited Turkey and Germany and Italy, other countries. But he said, you can come from any corner of the world to the United States and become an American. I think what you've just said about yourself, though, is wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
And wonderful
President.
of this school also to make that possible. But it's got to be that way for everyone.
Mr. President, my name is Anne Marie DeDee, and I'm a second-year law student from Rochester, New York. And my question for you today is, what other president do you most admire and why?
Well, I voted 4 times for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But then the two parties turned around, and they got like the other party had been, and so I stayed with what I believed, and that meant changing parties. But I have to admire one that I think has been neglected a great deal, whether this is the greatest one I acknowledge or not. Calvin Coolidge. He was a modest man and quiet, and there's very little memory among the people of the things that he accomplished and that he quietly did. But he was a man of great principle. And for example, he presided over several tax cuts all of which resulted in the federal government getting increased revenue at the lower rates. And that was one of the things I brought with my degree of economics. Our tax cut has increased the government revenues by $375 billion. But I admired Eisenhower, and of course, you go back to those greats, Lincoln and Washington. As a matter of fact, I followed one teaching of Lincoln's for 8 years, when Lincoln said I could not, for one day, perform the duties of this position if I did not know I could call upon one who is wiser and stronger than all others.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. God bless America, and God
But I
bless
just add one little anecdote about one that I didn't particularly admire generally, President Lyndon Johnson. But I did admire one thing that he had to say about a group that I sometimes was at odds with. He said, if I left the White House and walked down across the lawn to the Potomac River and walked across the river on the surface of the waters, the press would report the next day, President can't swim.
Mr. President, my name is Leila Desmail, and before I ask my question, I want to ask you on behalf of IMPACT, our social awareness group on campus, if you would endorse the World Peace Corps.
If
you would endorse the World Peace Corps.
Oh, yes. Those people, all volunteers. You mean the Peace Corps workers of ours?
Sorry?
You're talking about the Peace Corps workers of ours?
Yes,
overseas?
I want to know whether you would endorse the World Peace Corps on behalf of IMPACT, our social awareness group on campus.
Well, now you're asking me something I'm not. Just let me say that I have a great admiration for those people, young and old, who have volunteered for our Peace Corps and are serving overseas in many primitive countries and so forth, and serving brilliantly. Yes, they have a wonderful record. Is that
Yes,
touching?
thank you.
Right.
My question is, why is it that at the height of Israel's policy of repression towards the Palestinians, you and your administration as proponents of human rights did nothing to interact and did nothing to aid the Palestinian cause?
Well, it isn't a case of doing nothing. It's a case of the things that you're trying to do and that you can't go out and talk publicly about. We have been, ever since I've been there, we have been continuing a program trying to get the at odds nations in the Middle East to settle and have a peaceful solution. We've been working in every way that we can, and yes, there are times when our Israeli friends know that we frown upon very much upon what they're doing in some instances when we think they go too far. But we believe that peace can only come when the Arab nations and Israel agree to sit down together, and if they want others like ourselves to be there sort of as ex officio or to just kind of watch what's going on, be anointed, fine. But they are the ones who must settle it. Few people realize that today the state of peace between the Arab states and Israel has not come about. They are still technically and legally in a state of war. But we also believe that in this present thing, there are divisions among the Palestinian people also. And it took us a long time before we could persuade Arafat to make the statement, the commitment that he made to us, in which we then could sit down and have been sitting down with him in talking about the problems. Before, he had positions in which he endorsed terrorism and things of that kind, and we said there's no way we can talk with him until he commits himself to a desire for peace and an end to terrorism and so forth. And I can only tell you that, and I'm sure the present administration is going to continue, we've been doing everything we can to try and bring about peace in that troubled area.
Thank you.
Mr. President, my name is Dana Clark, and I guess I'm a business major.
That's not bad.
I'm from Fairview Heights, Illinois, and my question is, do you feel that there are any aspects or policies of the current administration that are in contrast to your own that you can foresee creating or causing President Bush problems in the future?
Well, my concern has been that it seems to be that they haven't really gotten into the policy things yet in their setting up their administration. So I've been kind of waiting until there is a declaration of program there. I have to believe, because George was a major part of everything we did. I didn't believe a vice president should sit on the sidelines waiting to take your pulse. And see you're taking a business course, and I think that the vice president should be like an executive vice president of a corporation, a part of the operation. As a matter of fact, he chaired that task force I mentioned in the beginning about eliminating the regulations. So I have confidence in him, but I must say there's now still some reorganization and some journeys that he's making and has not set a course. So I haven't heard him say anything that I disagree with, but by the same token, I just have to assume that he's going to continue on the path that we were on with regard to, well, I know where he stands on taxes, and I hope he never retreats from that, because that would be economic disaster for us to start increasing taxes.
Mr. President, my name is Deborah Nelson. I'm a first-year law student. I'm from Washington, D.C. My question for you today is, what are you doing with your time now that you're out of office?
Well, one of the big things I've been doing with my time, even up to and including yesterday all afternoon, is getting rid of those builders' cardboard cartons. The house is full of them. See, we sold our home here. So everything we owned had to be shipped here when we came to our new house. I never saw so many boxes in my life, and they don't tell me on the outside what's in them. We're still looking for a heating pad we know is there somewhere. But also, we have a suite of offices. We've moved in, and they're very wonderful. And we're starting in this planning about that mashed potato circuit. I already am booked for about a half a dozen speeches in the next few months, next couple of months that are going on. And then there are some people at a couple of universities that very kindly invited me to speak. But also I have hanging over me that what the press refer to as a monkey on their back, and I do. I have a contract with a publisher to do a book. And I want to tell you, I sit there looking at that blank page, and now and then I put something down in writing, and what I don't want to do one of those calendar things in which I go by saying, well, this day, and we did this and we did that. I just want to see if I can't give the readers an idea of what it was like to step into that house that you've driven by so many times and always had that kind of mystic aura about it, and then that office, and tell some of the surprising elements and the things that happened. One of the things I put down on the paper was a story. Jack Kilpatrick, the columnist, has a son. Well, he invited Nancy and me up to a lunch at his farm in Virginia. So this was one of the first things, Sunday lunch. We'd only been there a few weeks. We out to the South Lawn, you get on a helicopter. 20 minutes later, you're down in Virginia at the farm. And on the way into the house, he told me that my fellows had been there all week putting in the phones. And I said, what are you talking about? Putting in the phones. Well, he said, they tell me that you can't go anyplace unless there is a phone system in which you can reach anyone in the world on a moment's notice. I'd never heard about that. And do you know that for 8 years, if someone invited us to their home in Washington for dinner, when I got there was a White House phone in that house by the time I got there for dinner. But he told me that he challenged them that he couldn't make it everybody. And they said, well, who would you like to talk to? And he said, I got a son who's a quartermaster on the USS Pratt, a destroyer in the 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean. And they said, well, no, we can't get, well, he said, you said anybody. He said, no, when the fleet is on maneuvers, only the White House can get him. So he told me that. And the first person I met when I got in the house was the wife of the young man on the USS Pratt, a lovely young lady. I went back out and I said, is it true that I could get Quartermaster Kilpatrick? And they said, oh, yes, sir. And I said, get him. I have to tell you the finish of it. A couple of weeks later, I got a letter from Quartermaster Kilpatrick, and he told me what it was like when the fleet was on maneuvers. He said the air was full of radio traffic, ships talking to ships, admirals conversing with admirals. And he said, and then a voice came on and said, White House calling. And another voice said, what code is that? And a third voice said, maybe that's no code. And he said, even Hollywood could not have quieted the air as quickly as it was quieted. Then he said they came down for a lowly quartermaster on a tin can and told him he was wanted on the phone. Well, and the first thing I hadn't thought through was that the last part of that call was going to have to be by radio. The whole fleet could listen in on their conversation. But in his letter, he told me, he said it was a little bit like God calling the Vatican and asking for an altar boy by name. To this day, he signs his letters to me, your altar boy.
Hi, Mr. President. My name is Charity Nimmo. I'm from Fort Collins, Colorado, and I'm a vocal performance major. You've made great strides in thawing the Cold War between the USSR and the U.S. with your relationship with Gorbachev. Could you tell us a little bit about him, and should we still feel threatened by the Soviet Union?
Yes, I feel that we have to be guided by their deeds, not their words. And we have to remember that this man came along as an exception. There were 3 Soviet leaders before he came along while I was in office, and they kept dying on me. So we couldn't do much in the line of trying to make any contact. But this man is different. And he has come in and inherited an economic disaster that he has to deal with. And a lot of that economic disaster is due to their military buildup. Now, I can only tell you this, in the term, the few years that he's been there, he is the first Soviet leader who ever agreed to a treaty that would destroy weapons they already had. Always before they would talk, well, how many more can we agree to accumulate? But we have the INF Treaty, which is a miracle. We have verification. In fact, he began to laugh at me through some of our discussions because I'm not a linguist, but I did learn one Russian proverb, dovyai no provyai, trust but verify. And when I would say it to him, pretty soon he'd start shaking his head and laughing. But anyway, he's bound by what he has to do in this economic change. He is meeting with American businessmen on the basis of opening up to capitalists coming in partnership with them on businesses and industries. Big Mac is over there. Those gold parabolas are seen there. But as I say, I think that it is deeds. For example, our most touchy thing with him has been human rights. And I have made it a kind of challenge that because we hear from people and people behind the Iron Curtain telling us of people who are separated from their families, with a family that maybe has come to America and the husband is left there and they won't let him out and so forth. Every meeting I've had with him, I have presented him with a written list of names of people that I tell him are of personal interest to me and I would like to see. And up till now, every one of them has been released that we've done that with. So I believe that there is a chance. But the thing that we always have to keep in mind is that in the Russian government, you're appointed. The communists are the government, the Communist Party. So he's appointed. They could throw him out tomorrow if they wanted to. Now, the people like what they've heard in Russia. We were there for that meeting, and they like it. But the Politburo doesn't like it, the bureaucracy. They see an infringement on their perquisites. For example, he's taken away those special stores where they can go in and the other citizens can't go in, where they can buy without waiting in line and so forth. And this is making the bureaucrats a little upset. So you have to play the game carefully with the idea that he may not be there too long and someone else take over. But he is getting things done. I have to tell you, and I'm tempted beyond my strength on this, I have a new hobby. The Soviets, the people, make up stories, jokes, and they tell them among themselves, and it reveals they've got a great sense of humor. But they also have a little cynicism about their system. And I've collected all these jokes that I can actually prove come from Russia. And I've told him a couple. Now, some of them I can't tell him. It would be tactless to tell him some of them. But I have told him a couple. Like the one that I told him was that an American and a Russian in the story they're arguing about their countries. And the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can pound the president's desk and say, Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running our country. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, you can? He says, yes. I can walk into the Kremlin, to the General Secretary's office, pound his desk and say, Mr. General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country. But I do think that we have a relationship and we have something going that can encourage us to believe in peace for the future as far as we see it.
Good. Thank you.
Right.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Lisa Funkhauser. I am a public relations major from Okemos, Michigan. And my question for you today is, now that you have a more objective view of your term as president, is there anything you would have liked to have done differently?
Oh, my. Well, I have to tell you that I came into that job, I don't know whether any other presidents ever have, but I've been preaching so long and speaking so long, and with the governorship here in the 8 years in California, I entered office with a plan. Not just to go there and say, well, now, you know, what's on the boards and what are we going to do about this or that. A plan, and it started with restoring the economy. When we took office, with regard to national security, which is the prime responsibility of the president, on any given day, 50% of our military aircraft could not fly for lack of spare parts. 50% of our Navy vessels couldn't leave port for the same reason or for lack of crew. And I felt that this being the prime responsibility, we had to rebuild the military. And even if it meant, where I went to talk of cutting, even if it meant spending, that had to be done. National security is and must be the prime responsibility of the president and of the national government. But then, after that, on the economy, we had a prime interest rate of 21.5%. We had double-digit unemployment. We had double-digit inflation. And I came with the belief that our economic program, which was based on that complete overhaul of the taxing system, was essential to get the economy back on track. Well, today, inflation, as you know, is down to less than a third of what it was. The interest rates are down around 10%, not 21%. And as to unemployment, we have created 19 million new jobs during this term in office. It is the greatest and longest economic expansion in the history of our nation that is still going on. I can't, with getting that done, and maybe there were some things that lesser and down here secondary and so forth that maybe I could have done more about. I don't know. But, and as I said earlier, I still would have liked to have been able to deal with these other additional problems. I'm trying here to rack my brain of some disappointment where I thought, why didn't I do this or that? There were some times after I met with congressional leadership, and particularly the opposition, that when they left the room, I said, why didn't I tell those jerks that...
Thank you.
Mr. President, my name is Courtney Longmire. I'm a political science major here at Pepperdine from Anchorage, Alaska. It's nice to spend 6 warm months out of the year here. Considering the quality of student at Pepperdine, I know many of these students are going to go on to become prominent in their communities and are going to strive to achieve great things in their careers. I'd like to know what advice you would like to impart to the future leaders of America.
I'll tell you all, yes. I think the majority of you, if not all of you, are 18 and over, which means you're voters. The group between 18 and 24, the age group in this country, incidentally happens to be the group that was the most supportive of me in what we were doing. But let me tell you something. Among all the age groups, you rank lowest among those who vote. Now, it doesn't do any good to believe in something if you don't go into that polling place and take advantage of your democratic privilege there and vote and persuade those around you to join you in doing this. You are going to be the people that are taking over this nation very shortly. And you should be the one setting the pattern of participation in government. And then these things that you've applauded and indicated that you want to see done can get done if the people make their feelings known enough. Isn't it strange that there's a feeling, for example, that having a Congress of one party and a president of another is one of our checks and balances? That is not true. For these 58 years that I've mentioned a couple of times, for 54 of those 58 years, the Democratic Party has controlled the House of Representatives. Every Democratic president had a Democratic Congress, except for one 2-year period when Harry Truman had a Republican Congress. The 48 of the 58 years, both houses of the Congress have been Democrat. I had for 6 years a slight majority in the Senate, but still had the House of Representatives against us. So if you stop and think about it, the people who vote for the president must have voted for him to do the things that he said he was going to do. But then how do they justify sending a Congress there that is pledged to keep him from doing the things that he said he was going to do? Every Republican president in these last 50-odd years has had a Democratic Congress, except for my 6 with the one house, and once Eisenhower had for 2 years a Republican Congress out of his 8, and that's all. So it isn't really a case of balancing things off that way. So think about that a little bit more, and the responsibility of voting for, it isn't so much for an individual as voting for what you want done, what you want preserved in this in this country. So you're going to go out, and sure, when you get out there, you're going to have to start and find a niche for yourself and your first job and all that. Of course, the best job I ever had was while I was still in college. I was washing dishes in the girls' dormitory. But you're going to try to get established in whatever occupation you've chosen. And at the same time, though, keep in mind that this system of ours is unique in all the world. And it only works if we, the people, take charge and make it work. And you are we, the people, from here on out when you leave here. So don't be, as Will Rogers once said, the great humorist. He said, the people you elect to office are no better and no worse than the people who send them there. But they're all better than those who don't vote at all.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Anna Marie Troche. I'm a senior literature journalism major. My question for you today is, outside the presidency, what would you say would be your greatest accomplishment?
Well, not bedtime for Bonzo. Well, I have to go along with something. I inherited about as big a mess in California when I became governor as I did when I became president in Washington. In spite of our constitutional amendment against no deficit, I inherited a deficit. They'd been covering it up with bookkeeping tricks. And I had I only had 6 months. You come in the middle of the fiscal year. I only had 6 months. It was now my responsibility. I had to get rid of that deficit. And so did some things that I didn't want to do, and then started changing those as we went on. For example, in the matter of taxes, when we began finally, instead of deficit, to accumulating a surplus, Cap Weinberger was my finance director. And Cap came to me and he said, hey, we're going to have a surplus. And he said, before the legislature finds out about it, he said, I thought you might want to go public with some program that you've had in mind but haven't been able to do. And I said, I do have a program in mind. He said, what is it? And I said, give it back to the people. And he said, well, that's never been done. And I said, well, I never had an actor up here before either. So 4 times we gave back surpluses to the people. Because once I made the public announcement, the legislature didn't have the nerve to then object. But the 4th one was the biggest one, and it was a sizable one. And I'll never forget, a leader in the Senate of the opposite party stormed into my office, and he said, Mr. President, or Mr. Governor, he said, I just consider giving that money back to the people an unnecessary expenditure of public funds. And I thought he put in one sentence what I believe is the difference in the philosophy between a lot of us in government there. But what other than that? Well, I'm going to go far-fetched on you and tell you one. I was a sports announcer, as I told you. I was broadcasting Chicago Cubs ball games by telegraphic report in competition with announcers who were broadcasting right from the ballpark. So, you know, this fella sitting over here with the headphones on, hearing the dot and dash, would hit the typewriter and slip it to me under the window, and I'd look, say S1C. Well, you can't sell any Wheaties yelling S1C. So I knew what it meant, and I'd say, well, Dean's out of the windup, here comes the pitch, and it's a called strike, breaking over the outside corner to batter them, and so forth and so on. Well, it was the 9th inning of a game between the Cardinals and the Cubs. And Dean was the pitcher. And Billy Jurgis was at bat for the Cubs. And I saw Curly start to type. So I started Dean to come out of his windup and, you know, here's the pitch. And he was shaking his head no, and he slipped it to me, and it says, the wire has gone dead. Well, I thought, good Lord, if I ask for some transcribed music while we see if they can fix the wire, everybody will turn to those other stations. I won't have any audience anymore. So I thought, and I had a ball on the way to the plate. So I had Jurgis foul it off. And I thought, well, let's try that. That doesn't get in the score column. So I had him foul one that just missed being a home run by a foot. And then I had him foul one down back a third and describe the two kids that got in a fight over the ball. And this went on to where I was setting a world record for a fellow staying at bat and hitting successive foul balls. And all of a sudden, Curly straightened up and started typing. And I got Dean, had him use the rosin bag, get up and get his sign, and come out of the wind-up, and got the slip of paper. And then I started to giggle. And I could hardly talk for giggling. It said Jurgis popped out on the first ball pitched. But the achievement was that Jurgis's time at bat got in Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Thank you.
All right.
President Reagan, my name's Mark Redmond. I'm going to be your final question today. I'm a senior business major from Torrance, California. All of us are here, and we're going to spend 4, maybe more years graduating from this institution. We're going to learn a lot of valuable lessons along the way. What were 2 of the most valuable things you learned in your 8 years as president?
The most valuable things I learned? To have faith in the people, for one. I love the people. And not all politicians feel that way. They're dependent on them for support, so they kind of resent it. But well, I've already mentioned with my reference to Lincoln, the other thing. I don't think you go any place without talking to your friend up there about it. I don't know beyond that, except that when it comes time to settle down, get yourself a wife that is the kind that can get an honorary degree at Pepperdine. But I don't know. I just can't. There are things I know that I learned. You grow. You can't help but grow in that job. One great regret that I do have is that I never met the young lady at Ohio State in the arena like this who was carrying a homemade sign when I spoke there. And I really would have liked to have met her, because the sign said, "He ain't old, he's cute." That's it? Right. All right. Thank you all, and God bless you all. Thank you.
If I might ask you to be seated for just a moment, we have 2 items we'd like to present to the President as he leaves this morning. First of all, on behalf of all of us, we've had weekly convocation, for a time even daily convocation, for 52 years now. And this is clearly the most exciting moment in those 52 years, the most distinguished speaker that we've had. And the first speaker, as far as I know of, who said, "I would like not only to speak, but I'd just like you to choose a dozen students any way you know how to choose them, and I'd like to respond to their questions and engage in dialogue." I think that's a very special part of the educational process. I think it should be encouraging. I know we've learned a lot about Israel and the Soviet Union and the balanced budget, but I think it should also be encouraging to learn that the most powerful person in the world is a very natural, warm person of goodwill and good character, and I think it's good for you as students to have the opportunity to observe that as well. We have, and if you may remember, it was actually 2 dinners. So many people wanted to attend that we filled up 2 hotels, and Governor Reagan gamely went back and forth between the 2 hotels to give his speeches. In 1975, he was here to dedicate Eureka College. He has planted a tree on our campus, which, Mr. President, in 1980 was renamed by students the Reagan Bush in honor of your ticket. And then his wife Nancy was here in 1983 to receive an honorary doctorate degree, making them the first couple in the history of the university to both receive that degree. And so last year, when we published our 50-year history, it's not surprising that our most distinguished alumni, Dr. Ronald and Dr. Nancy Reagan, are featured prominently in it. And I'd like to read an inscription and present this volume to the President. To President Ronald Reagan, you inspired a nation with your vision, your faith, your hope, and your unwavering commitment to a better world. Throughout the 8 years of your administration, your association with Pepperdine University has been a source of great encouragement and pride. America rests its hope upon the promise of her young people. This volume, which reflects the history of our efforts in education, contains treasured memories of your friendship and encouragement. May the heroic contributions of our best-known honorary alumni, Doctors Ronald and Nancy Reagan, take their proper and prominent place in the annals of American history. Thank you very much. At this time, our Student Government Association President, Chris DiBattista, also has a very special presentation from the student body. Chris?
Mr. President, on behalf of the Eureka College students, MBA, and our distinguished law school, I want to thank you for speaking to us today and welcome you back to California. And we thought, since you're going to have all this extra time now in your life, we wanted to help you promote exercise and good health and give you something kind of to boost that, and also give you something that our landlocked rival universities couldn't offer, something that is distinguishable for Pepperdine to make you an official Pepperdine wave. And my Vice President Sam's going to bring that right now.